Folks, we're back. This is Steve Sanson, Stephanie Phillips with Veterans in Politics. Today our guest is going to be Timothy Treffinger. He is running for the Clark County District Attorney's Office. But before we get to Mr. Treffinger, Stephanie, you have any rants?
I do. So I hear on the mainstream media that they're trying to blame Putin for the higher gas prices now. And people are believing that hook, line, and sinker, but it all started back when...
Just like the Ukrainian people are killing their own people.
Right. Well, it all started back when Biden took office the first day, shut down Keystone, and then just the whole oil and gas industry went down. So you take out production, inflation comes, higher prices come, and we've been seeing higher prices at the pump, and... Anyway.
So I plan to send the White House a copy of all my gas receipts so he could reimburse me for the difference that it was before he went in till it is now.
Right. I'm going to send mine too.
You going to send yours too?
Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
Tim, you want to send yours too?
I drive electric, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Sorry.
He got smart. He drives
I saw it coming.
Oh, he saw it coming. He's like, I better get an electric car. Was that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Treffinger.
Good morning. Or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Oh, still morning.
Still morning?
Yeah. Could you give us a bio, please?
Sure.
And don't leave anything out.
Sure.
Because you never know what we know.
Oh, well, that's again ominous, but that's fine. I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in New Jersey. Come from a conservative family. My mother's been a teacher for 40 years, but a conservative teacher. Father worked in telecommunications. Went to school at Loyola University and University of Notre Dame. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology.
You play football?
I wish. I was a hockey player in New Orleans, actually. After going to college, I went to law school at Loyola University in New Orleans and then University of New Hampshire. It was Franklin Pierce when I started.
Okay.
I have a jurist doctorate and an LLM.
You're a doctor?
Not that kind of doctor.
But you have a doctorate?
That's just the JD, not the higher level.
Okay.
I have the master's above the JD in International Criminal Law and Social Justice.
Oh, beautiful.
But my main focus has always been on criminal law. I worked in the criminal defense clinic at UNH, which was student run. It was supervised by an attorney, but I was in court as a student. Came out of law school and went to the Story County District Attorney's Office for an externship up in Virginia City, Nevada. That was an interesting experience.
How many people live up there in Story?
Not very many.
How long were you up there for?
I started as an extern, so I worked for free for the county for 8 months, and then I was there for a year as the only deputy DA in that office.
Wow.
Following that, I came down to Southern Nevada. I worked for the Nevada Attorney General's office in the Tri-County Prosecution Unit, doing all the sex crimes and Violence Against Women Act crimes for 3 counties. And after that, went into private practice, and that's where I've been since then. Mainly, I do criminal defense and family law. But I've always, my passion's for criminal law.
How come I've never heard of you?
I don't advertise. All my business has been word of mouth. I kind of fly under the radar, but I have a pretty decent practice.
So do you have any high-profile criminal cases that you've done or worked on?
I've had a few.
What were they?
I've had the young lady who unfortunately ran over the nail salon technician a few years ago, Crystal Whipple. I handled that homicide case.
Okay.
I have a homicide case that starts on Tuesday. Which is an old case with someone who was kind of put through the ringer in competency court and kept in Stein Hospital off and on for 2 years. Now she's 3 years in and we're finally doing her trial.
Okay.
Those are really the only 2 high-profile cases I could say I've had. I do a lot of high-level felony drug cases. I did a lot of high-level felony cases for the DA's office in Pahrump when I was with the AG's office because I was cross-deputized.
Oh, so you was with the AG's office as well?
Correct. So I was with the Nevada AG, but I was cross-deputized in Nye, Esmeralda, and Mineral County, so I covered that whole stretch of highway. I did, anytime it was a domestic violence case or a sex assault case or anything like that, I would handle those cases.
Why didn't you run for AG?
It honestly didn't come up. I think you have a very good candidate for AG. You've recently had on the show. I have a lot of respect for Sigal Chadha, and I don't really have that big statewide persona. I ended up in this race because I felt there were no conservative voices in this race. You have Steve Wolfson, who was appointed to the job. When a Republican left, he was appointed in as a Democrat. He's been there for the last 8 years.
But he did get elected.
Of course, after that, yes. Yeah. And then you have Ozzie Fumo as another Democrat. There are no other conservative voices in this fight, and I did want to make sure that there was at least one representative on this side of the
That's very noble. Okay. So so you're in the race because there's no other conservative voice.
I'm in the race because there should always be balance, I feel. There should always be consistency. And
Gotcha.
we don't have that here. We have, I think even last time around when Steve got reelected, it was him against a Democrat. There was no Republican in the race. Mm-hmm. And I think there are some...
I think he went unchallenged last time, didn't he? No,
I thought he ran against Steve Langford.
Oh, probably.
Yeah, I think, he was unchallenged in
Langford, Robert Langford,
sorry.
who's married to Judge Ann Zimmerman.
Correct, I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I felt there wasn't enough conservative voices in this fight, and I think there are things that need to change in the DA's office, especially with consistency in the way things are handled, and that's why I'm in this fight.
Okay. Stephanie?
Back in 2017, you had an arrest for possession of heroin. Can you talk about that?
Sure.
And what happened with that case and kind of address your side of that story?
Absolutely. And it's something I've never hidden from. It's something I have to explain to clients every time they hire me. I was bar disciplined for it. It's not something I hide from.
How long were you bar disciplined?
I was not suspended. I had a public reprimand, but I was not suspended. Because I took responsibility for what was going on, and I can tell you I was in a relationship with a girl who developed a drug problem after I knew her.
Right.
Was trying to get her clean. Didn't realize how bad the problem had gotten really until the SWAT team was raiding my house out in Pahrump.
Why would they raid your house for that?
So
that sounds like an overkill.
Pahrump's a small town.
Right.
It's very cliquish. We had a new DA, a new sheriff. That was when Angela Bello had just gotten elected.
Okay.
Sharon Worley got elected. Ironically, Sharon was my investigator, and then her SWAT team's raiding my house. That was interesting.
Wow.
So...
Because of a drug
Because
issue.
she had a drug issue, and apparently she was doing some kind of sales when I wasn't home. I was commuting back and forth to Pahrump at that time. Before I went into full private practice, I worked for Liberty Mutual for 6 months. So I was barely, if anyone has any familiarity with insurance defense, it's miserable, and it's a lot of time in the office.
Yes.
So what happened. I was arrested. They accused me of running a drug house because I knew she had a drug problem, and I let her live in my house, even though it was a long-term relationship. I took responsibility for it. I ended up pleading to possession. It was state adjudication under the diversion program. Mm-hmm. I did 2.5 years on probation. I jumped through all the hoops with them and the bar. The case was ultimately dismissed, but I never lost my license, and I've maintained the integrity of my practice throughout.
So you weren't on heroin, or you didn't have a drug issue?
No, I asked them to drug test me 5 times as they were talking to me. They didn't want to do that.
They didn't drug test you at all?
No.
And you don't have to adhere to any drug test at all?
Now I don't.
Okay.
I did when I was on probation like anybody else. I'm very familiar with that system, having been on both sides of it and in it. Yeah. But no, I never had a dirty drug test. I never had any issues on probation. I was honorably discharged and the case was dismissed.
What made you do that anyways? What made you go to the heroin? What drove you to do that?
I was not on the heroin.
Oh, you didn't? No. You didn't take it?
No. See, it was in a public area. They didn't find any drugs in my bedroom. They found heroin that was the ex's.
The girlfriend.
Correct.
Oh, okay. You didn't take any of the heroin.
Correct. I've never done heroin. No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Oh, I was sweating.
Oh. And I know that's the conception because it's possession. But people don't understand. Possession covers a wide variety of things. If you're in the car with somebody who has it and it's not on their person, you're in constructive possession. I
want you to explain possession to the lay people out there. Sure. That way they can have a better understanding what happened to you.
Sure. So possession, if it's in your house, if it's in your car, and this could be drugs, a gun, and a felon in possession of firearm, this happens a lot. If it's in any place where more than one person has access to it, you're constructively in possession. So again, there was paraphernalia in my house. I don't deny that. She was a drug user. I was trying to get her clean. There was a very small amount of drugs found in the living room of my house. I was in the bedroom asleep when they came pounding on my door. But it was in my house. I own that, and I've paid my debt to society as far as working through the motions on that. I've paid my debt to the bar, which no bar discipline is cheap, even when it's a reprimand. But I've never let it defeat me. I've always been a fighter. I wasn't going to let that stop me in my career or my path.
Were you taken into custody?
I was briefly, and I bailed out within 24 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Stephanie?
I was just reading recently, they had changed the laws, what is considered now felony theft. Mm-hmm. It went from $250 to $1,200, is it now?
I believe so, yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
So you hear about these people, they walk into the store and they, homeless folks or whoever, and they fill up a bag and walk out the front door with all these, and it seems like increasing that just emboldens people to walk in and steal. And the store owners, most of the time, they're not going to do anything. The manager's on duty. So what is your opinion of that? And it seems like we should be more tough on crime and criminals instead of going the other direction.
I absolutely agree with you on that. And it harms, at the end of the day, the people who that hurts most. It's not Walmart. It's not the big chain stores. It's the mom and pop stores.
Right.
We've made it so that we're not prosecuting these rings of shoplifters who have the intent to go in there and commit a felony amount of theft. And hey, it's a misdemeanor. Get them in, OR them, they're back on the street, they're back in custody a few weeks later, OR them, and it just goes on. And even when you get a conviction on the misdemeanor, we're not putting them in jail.
OR for those people's order release.
Own recognizance release. Okay. So they're not required to post bail. I mean, there's a pretty religious use of electronic monitoring now, but even with that, it's not solving the problem. And that's part of the consistency I'm talking about with the DA's office here. We're decriminalizing things like what you're talking about.
Right.
And we're just letting those people out. But we're so focused on, I mean, I've had clients where, his jacket fell over his firearm. He's being arrested for unlawful concealed carry because he doesn't have a concealed carry permit. Which of those two crimes is really hurting the community more? I would say the theft is hurting the community more.
Right, right.
Let's talk about domestic violence.
Sure.
Okay. When my understanding is when an officer is called to a residence for a domestic violence disturbance, they automatically have to take somebody to jail. Is that true? Even if there's no bruises, no marks, do they have to take somebody to jail?
That's a tough question to answer because I as an attorney, and I did prosecute domestic violence cases, probably over 200 of them over the 3 counties I covered. Mm-hmm. I will say that there's very little consistency there, too, as to why one person is arrested, or sometimes they'll arrest both people, which is fantastic as a prosecutor because then you have no witness. And that was part of it. I think there's a lack of training there. Part of my marching orders when I was in that job is I had to draft training for law enforcement on domestic violence. And I'll be honest with you, I had to deny a lot of domestic violence cases out in the counties I worked in because of the police work. We need to train our officers to know, look, if just because there's a call, we don't need to put someone in custody. That pendulum has swung so far because back in the day, look, no one was prosecuting domestic violence. You had battered women, no one was taking them seriously. Right. Now there was a phone call, so now there's a domestic violence case. And practicing in family court, I can tell you right now, that's used as a weapon a lot.
Did O.J. Simpson mess it up for everybody?
I don't know if it was O.J. There's been a lot of people who've messed it up for everybody. Mm-hmm. But the problem now is domestic violence shouldn't be used as a weapon in family court or anywhere else because now we have the presumption, there's a domestic violence case. So now there's a presupposition that they're not a fit parent.
Yeah, they shouldn't even be in family court because that's not a criminal court. Domestic violence is a crime.
And I agree with you on that. And don't get me wrong, if there's a conviction, okay. But these allegations used weaponizing the criminal justice system that way, that's not what it's for.
Right.
And again, consistency. You're either, and I don't mean consistency as, there's a phone call so you arrest everybody, or you're always going to arrest. You have to investigate. You have to make sure that when you're putting someone in custody for a crime like domestic violence, that impacts their job, that impacts their family, and then the charging above that. There has to be consistency of charging.
And then it goes for years on because it stays on your record. Correct. Unless you get it sealed.
Right.
And then you get new employment, you have to put that on the application. That's embarrassing as crap.
Correct. And I know it's impacted people. I've had clients it impacts in the medical field. People are concerned about domestic violence. It's a liability thing. Insurance companies don't like it. It impacts people on so many different levels. This misdemeanor crime, and I'm not minimizing domestic violence. Domestic violence is a horrible thing. But it needs to be a real threat, a real battery. It has to be charged appropriately. It has to be handled correctly in court. And if there's not enough evidence there, it's the DA's job not to charge those cases. There are so many cases I see where if it's just he said, she said, can you really meet reasonable doubt on that? I mean, I guess, but it really depends on your witnesses, and there needs to be more consistency there.
The statute of limitation on domestic violence, because there's 2 types.
Right.
There's felony and the misdemeanor. The felony is with strangulation.
Correct.
Right?
Or substantial bodily harm.
Right.
Yeah.
So the statute of limitation of domestic violence is 2 years, correct?
On a misdemeanor, I believe it's a year and a day. On the felonies, I believe
2 years.
It's 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about felony and domestic violence.
Sure.
Okay. if a litigant, or let's call it the victim, has photos of the domestic violence, scratch mark, bruises, whatever, and waits a year and a half before she filed for domestic violence. Let's go with the she, because the majority of domestic violence domestic violence victims are females.
Sure.
So let's go with the she. And it comes before your desk, right? And you got all the photos, and it's a year and a half. Are you going to say, you know what, this is too old, I'm not going to do it, although the statute says 2 years?
I think the case should be investigated. I think you have to talk to the witness and see, was there a reason that they didn't come forward? Because there's a lot.
Does that really matter, though? Because she's in the statute of limitations. It's 2 years. Does it matter if she had a reason or not?
I think it depends. Okay. I think if the reason she's coming forward a year and a half in is because she's now embroiled in a divorce and custody case and is trying to weaponize the charge, then I think that's a credibility issue. And you got to check the pictures. There's ways that, unfortunately, as technology improves, there's ways to fake things. I've had situations where people have put marks on themselves. You have to investigate every case as an individual case and apply the law consistently, and that's what's not happening.
Okay. I want to change direction.
Sure.
Were you here in 2011?
No, that was 1 year before I got here.
All right, I'll paint a picture for you.
Sure.
In 2011, there was a police shooting.
Okay.
There was an officer that shot and killed an unarmed Gulf War veteran, Stanley Gibson.
Okay.
And everybody was telling the DA to have that officer get prosecuted. But the DA decided to go with the coroner's inquest, which was the first coroner's inquest on the police shooting in Nevada's, in Metro's history. What would you have done if you had an officer-involved shooting and the officer fired 7 times into the vehicle? Stanley Gibson didn't have a weapon, and he was hit 5 times with an AK-47 or AR-15, I forget which ones, and he was hit 5 times, died from his injuries. He had nowhere to go. He was barricaded in by 2 patrol cars, and there was a video of the whole thing. What would you have done? Would you have waited for the coroner's inquest, which is the coroner's inquest? I mean, not the coroner's inquest. It was that secret. That's the grand jury. It was a grand jury, and nobody knows who the grand jury is. Nobody knows nothing. It's a secret thing. The grand jury is secret. You do know that. I want to know why the grand jury is secret, anyways. But that's a whole different topic. Right. But what would you have done with that? Would you have sent this police officer to the grand jury, or would you have indicted him for wrongful death? So
I think at that point, and again, I wasn't here, and I'm just taking it off the facts that you're giving me, but that sounds like a case that should have been prosecuted. There's no one. There's a lot of this. We need to make examples of police officers. We don't need to make examples of anybody. We need to apply the law consistently. So you have to look at that situation, take the person's job, gender, age, all of that gets taken out of it. Under those circumstances, I'm taking that case to preliminary hearing, or I'm taking it to the grand jury, or I'm taking it wherever I need to go. And if the judge doesn't believe there's enough evidence to bring it up, or the grand jury doesn't believe there's enough evidence to bring it up, at least I tried to get the case into the upper court, because that's the DA's job. It's not passion, it's not prejudice. Apply the law. The outcome isn't what matters. It's the fact that you have applied the law appropriately and taken it up to where it needs to go. So I would prosecute that case.
Let's talk guns.
Sure.
If a person has a reasonable fear of someone, reasonable fear that they're going to be harmed by this person, but that person doesn't have a weapon, but you do, and you fired. For example, like what happened a few days ago, there was a man charged a police officer and the police officer he was charging at the police officer. He didn't actually physically had contact with the officer. The officer fell, and while he was on his back, fired 3 shots and killed the perpetrator. Now, if a person has reasonable fear that their life is in danger, although that person that's coming at them don't have a weapon, but the person with the reasonable fear has and fires and kills the other person, is it justified?
I think under those circumstances, it certainly could be. Because I will say this, just because you have a weapon and they don't, doesn't mean that those weapons you have cannot be taken from you. And if you're already on the ground, on your back, in a defensive posture, you're in a bad spot. Unfortunately, police officers carry a lot of things that can also be turned back on them. I did work campus police back in New Orleans when I was in college.
It doesn't even have to be an officer.
But anybody who carries that, that's one of the dangers of carrying, and that's something you need to accept when you carry a firearm and you take that responsibility, is you need to know your weapon proficiently enough not to have it taken from you. Mm-hmm. But if you're in a spot where you feel that weapon can be taken from you, I believe that's justifiable homicide.
Okay. Stephanie?
You said you prosecuted sex crimes against women. What years was that?
So that was, I believe, I was in the Story County DA's office from 2012 to 2013. I think I started at the AG in 2014. I left.
What'd you leave?
There was a change. I went in under Catherine Masto. There was a change. I believe Adam Laxalt got elected, and I didn't survive the change in administration.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, that's... honestly, I was burnt out, to be honest, doing those kind of cases. There was a lot of cases involving kids. Prosecuting those cases is extremely taxing.
Right.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. Sorry to interrupt you, but the sex trafficking of children is a huge billion-dollar industry. Mm-hmm. A lot of that comes through Las Vegas, and we see that here. But the law was, and maybe it still is, but they would go after these underage girls mm-hmm. and treat them, they would arrest them, treat them as prostitutes almost, and kind of not back them up when they're being sold out there, and they're not the ones that are calling the shots. And has that changed and how you guys handle children as far as, being under a trafficker or a pimp, or how that goes? So
I was prosecuting out in the rurals where trafficking happens, but it's not as prolific as it is here in Vegas. Mm-hmm. I don't think I prosecuted a sex trafficking case when I was with the AG. I know just based on recent news that they have gotten better at treating victims as victims, but there's still a long way to go. This has been a problem since I was in law school. I took classes on sex trafficking. That was part of the LLM I took for international criminal law, because a lot of that comes from other countries and are brought here, and Reno too. We have to treat those victims as victims. Yes. You have to respect the fact that, are they doing what a regular prostitute is doing? Sort of, but it's not by choice. No. These are not people who are just out there on the corner saying, hey, this is how I want to make money. The sex industry is what it is. These are not sex workers. These are victims. And that's an important distinction that needs to be made. Yeah, more needs to be done to protect these kids, because a lot of them are extremely young. Absolutely. And they don't, and they're not savvy in the criminal justice system. They're not savvy dealing with law enforcement. And that's the problem. There needs to be more bedside manner with those victims, child victims. And as a prosecutor, I put children as young as 5 years old on the stand for sex crimes. It's a different world. You don't deal with those people the way you would deal with a normal victim in a normal case. Right. And I think that's a sensitivity that a lot of offices lack. I agree.
Keep going, Stephanie.
I had one more thing I wanted to ask you about too. Sorry. I know what it was. All of the rioting and all of the destruction of cities and buildings and burning of cars and looting and all of this stuff. What are your thoughts about that? Because I don't think that a lot of these people, they were just let out of jail and not prosecuted, and just nobody really has been held accountable for all of that happened across our country the last couple of years. What are your thoughts on that, and how would you handle that? Those people need to be prosecuted. That's not a protest. It's a riot. It's destruction of property. It's theft. You can't tell me that part of standing up for any right is going in and stealing TVs, electronics, burning cars. You're not protesting. You're just causing violence in the community. It harms small business owners. It harms our community, and it makes people afraid to walk down the street. There's obviously a big racial tension and divide in our country right now. But again, consistency. DAs are supposed to apply the law consistently. So if anyone else is setting a car on fire and that's arson, and someone does it during a protest, it's still arson and still should be arrestable. It still should be prosecuted. Right. And what do you think about all this defunding the police theme that the left has come up with?
I believe the police should be defended in the situations where it's
defunding
defunding.
The police.
Oh, I'm sorry, defunding. I'm not for defunding the police. It's ridiculous. You see what happens in the communities where they took that tack. Murder goes up substantially. Violent crime goes up substantially. Thefts go up substantially. And then who gets blamed? The government, even though the people called for defunding of the police. Training is important, but we need our police. We need a partnership between the DA's office and the police so that cases are investigated appropriately so that the DA can do their job. Because if I'm elected DA, I have no cases if Metro doesn't do what they need to do appropriately.
Mm-hmm. What is the biggest difference between you and the current DA, would you say, and what would you do differently if you were elected? For a start, I would be more proactive. I'm not sure, and granted, I've been here for the past 10 years, but I haven't always been in Clark County. But as far as I know, he doesn't walk into court and pick up a file and go prosecute cases. I think that's important. You need to be on the front lines with your deputies so that they know that what your policy is, that they're following those policies, and they see that you're out there fighting with them. Being a politician is great. I love some of the programs that he has. The Veterans Court, I think, is a great program. Some of the other programs he's created are great programs. But you need to be more proactive and lead and be in court.
In that defense, he never created the Veterans Court program. The Veterans Court program was created before he was even in office. That was in 2008, 2009. And the reason why I know that so well is because I helped to write the original Veterans Court program, 2008, 2009, which was in law in 2009 by Governor Jim Gibbons. Or Gibson. Gibbons.
I was before my time.
Gibbons. I always get those Gibson.
But it's a great program.
But he did amend the original Veterans program. So I do give him credit for the amending part of the Veterans Court program. So I just want to make sure that's clear so everybody has a good understanding. And that leads me to my question. What has, well, let me go back. No, that leads me to original. What has he done or not done that you would have done differently?
I think it comes back to consistency. I don't think the death penalty is applied consistently in that office. I do appreciate the fact there's a death review panel and it's not just left up to one person. That's a good thing. I'm very confused as to how it's applied. I've seen cases where I think obviously it should be and it's not. I've seen cases where I'm questioning why certain cases are being brought to death. Charging of cases, why some cases are supremely overcharged and other cases are charged with misdemeanors and kind of kicked under the rug. There's just no consistency. And I think that has to do with him not being down in the courtroom and seeing what's going on.
Like his predecessor, David Roger, who was, he took cases and he tried cases as being a district attorney, but he still tried cases. For example, the O.J. Simpson case, with the robbery case. Would you have handled that differently, or because the way this is how I saw the O.J. Simpson case, because everybody has a prejudgment of O.J. Simpson because they think that he was guilty of murder, of double homicide in California, but he walked into a hotel room with somebody else that had a gun. He didn't have a gun. And to get his stuff that was stolen from him, but David Roger prosecuted that case himself. How would you handle something like that?
That's a tough case, just because
Do you think before you answer, sorry to interrupt, do you think the normal person would have just got off on that and walked from it?
I don't. No. I think anytime you're walking into a hotel room, whether you think it's justified or not to get your belongings back, you're creating a dangerous situation. There were better ways to handle that. I would have been beating people down and steal from me. And I respect that on some level, but if you're looking at it from the perspective of the office, I'm just looking at the situation. There's plenty of other ways to get your stuff back. You have the money to pursue attorneys and do things to get your stuff back. We're not talking about someone who's indigent and feels they have no other way out. I think you definitely have created a violent public situation in a hotel with a gun. Who knows?
He didn't have a gun, though.
But there was a gun.
Somebody else had it. And I could say, I didn't know he had a gun.
I mean, depending on how you read some of the testimony in that case, I don't think he could say that he didn't know there was a gun involved. And I respect where you're coming from, but I still think... I think it was probably overcharged. I think the sentence he got has a lot more to do with people's suspicions of what happened in the past.
And I think that was BS.
And believe me, I've had clients who served time with him in prison who've talked to me about OJ, and I think it was mishandled. I think it should have been charged a different way.
What did you just say?
It was mishandled.
No, I think that some clients who served time with me in prison.
No, not me with him. With
okay.
OJ. No, I've never been. Like I said, 18 hours in jail was enough for me.
I'm like, how long were you in there? I thought you was in there overnight.
just overnight. And well,
how'd you go to prison?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It's a county jail.
Right. Well, if you.
Good thing I caught that.
Have you ever been in? You've never been in Pahrump County Jail. I'd rather.
No, I've never been in Pahrump County Jail. I've been in Clark County Jail.
I wouldn't want to be there either.
No, I don't want to be in any jail.
I mean, and the conditions there are a whole other story. But
and everything was dismissed. So, anybody could be arrested, but not everybody could be convicted. Remember that. There you go.
And mine was dismissed too, just for the record. But
little different. You gotta let people know. They try to mix the two up between conviction and arrest.
Sentence or proven guilty.
Right. Exactly.
There was something else I wanted to touch on, but Jesus, I just keep going, Stephanie.
We talked about this last time, but I want to bring it up again. Red flag laws seem to be extremely broad in nature.
Yes.
So do you think that those should be reeled in or just completely gotten rid of?
They, at the very least, need to be reeled in. I would prefer to see them gone completely. I'm also very much for constitutional carry. I've referenced them prosecuting concealed carry cases in a way that I think is ridiculous. I can't sit here and say that I would not prosecute concealed carry charges because I think that'd be a violation of my oath of office, but I could tell you that I would be very selective on which of those cases that I would bring before the court. And I think the red flag laws go way too far. I mean,
like a violation of constitutional.
Of the Second Amendment.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you toured the county jail?
I'm in there all the time with clients. I haven't done a tour, but I've seen the parts that the attorneys can go into. And I've seen the parts that are on TV because, of course, we've had a lot of media in our jail here.
Would you have a problem prosecuting a judge?
No.
Okay.
I think it's easy to say, hey, I'm going to kick this out to the AG or I'm going to kick this out to a special prosecutor. But again, I'm all about consistency. If a judge is doing something they shouldn't do, if the judge is doing something in violation of the law, I think it's a duty and my oath to prosecute that person. It doesn't matter what their position is.
Does the current district attorney has a public corruption unit in there?
I'm not sure if they do or not.
Would you have one if that was you?
As long as I wasn't stepping on the toes of some other jurisdiction, because I know the AG does handle a lot of that. But if it's in I have no problem investigating anything from public corruption to voter issues if it falls under the county's purview. I'm not going to go outside my jurisdiction. But if it's a crime committed in my county, I'm investigating it, and if it's appropriate, I'm prosecuting it.
So if I brought you information that a judge committed perjury, bankruptcy, mortgage fraud, and I brought you that information, would you go after that judge because apparently he violated his code of ethics as well? And he's unbecoming of a judge as well. Would you go after that judge?
As long as there's a crime that's at the county level, I'm prosecuting the case. Like I said, I'm not seeing what the person does for a living.
And that's Matthew Harder, Judge Harder, who did that. I always got to make sure that everybody knows exactly who did it, because you know what stuns me is this, that I brought this up to so many people. I even had billboards out. That's how far I went with it. And nobody's done anything because you're all spineless.
And I'm not going to be spineless. If I don't care if you're a judge, a law enforcement official, someone working in my office, if you're in my jurisdiction and you commit a crime and the law applies to you, I'm prosecuting the case. And that's my promise above anything else. It'll be consistent prosecution of all cases that should be prosecuted.
Would you have an open door policy?
I would. I think that's a great thing. I think the public should be able to come in and talk to the DA, because the DA kind of has this mythical position in a lot of places where they don't understand what they do or why they do things. I mean, it leaves you open to a lot more criticism, I think, because you're talking to the public, but that's okay. We should be transparent. Everything should be transparent, in my opinion.
Stephanie?
So if you're elected to this office, what are your long-term goals? Do you plan to run for the Attorney General's Office of the State? What do you see in your future?
So I'm not a career politician. Like I said, I'm in this race because I didn't feel that the conservative voices were adequately represented. I don't necessarily have higher aspirations. I want to fix the problems I see at the county level because that's where I am and that's what I'm dealing with. If something comes down the road 4, 8, 10 years down the road, sure, maybe a higher office, but my focus is on Clark County right now.
Okay. And we asked Sigal this, what do you think of October 1 and getting more answers and kind of bringing closure to a lot of people that still have a lot of questions?
I think, again, transparency is key. Why would we be hiding anything with regard to any major incident like that in our community? I think it's dangerous. I think it creates conspiracy theories. I think it creates situations where people don't trust their elected officials, don't trust law enforcement, don't trust their DAs. That makes it impossible for us to do our job. And I think that there was not enough transparency there.
Okay. Mr. Triffinger. Treffinger. Is there anything you wanted to add that we haven't covered?
One thing I did, because I have followed you guys for a while.
How long?
Probably since I've been in Clark County, because I practice in family court, so I watch your videos. Probably about 5 years.
You've been following us for 5 years?
I don't know if I've been going back that far, but at least since I've been doing family practice. One of the things that you're very much for is the retain question on the ballot.
The remove or retain.
Remove or retain. I'm absolutely for that.
And explain what that is so they could understand.
So right now, basically, you have a judge come up for election. If they don't have an opponent, they get one vote, they win. It's automatic. A remove or retain basically says you vote for them or you vote to remove them from office. So it's not as easy a win for somebody. Right. And I think that's, again, it's transparency. If you're not doing what you need to do, regardless of what office you're in, and that includes mine, if I'm screwing up, I expect to be recalled. I expect to be removed from office. That's what you should expect if you're failing the people who elected you.
I'm glad you brought that up because it comes to this question. Do you believe in the Supreme Court ruling that a judge should not be recalled, although they're the only elected body that can't be recalled?
No, I think what's good, again, and I feel like I've said this word 100 times, it's consistency. If it's good for one politician, why is it not? Because at the end of the day, all of our judges are elected. All of our Supreme Court justices are elected. Mm-hmm. If I'm subject to recall, if anybody's subject to recall, everybody should be subject to recall. Or the remove or retain. Whatever keeps a fail-safe so that the people have a voice, not just, hey, I'm going to go down and vote for myself and I'm reelected. It's ridiculous.
Yes. Okay. Do you have anything else?
That's it.
Do you have anything else? Mr. Treffinger?
Hey, you're still.
I gotta think about it.
You're still doing better than most people do. No, I think you've covered a lot of my main issues, and I appreciate you having me here. As I said, this is my first political interview because I never expected to be a politician.
Right.
8 months ago, I would never have expected to be sitting here. As of yesterday, I'm the only Republican candidate running.
Yes, you are.
So I'm proud to be that representative, and I'm going to do the best I can. Win or lose, at least I'm going to shine light on some of these issues.
Very good. Mr. Treffinger, thank you so much for coming on the program, by the way. Could you look into the camera, Mark is going to zoom in on you, and tell folks why they need to have that conservative voice in the district attorney beginning in November, or actually January of next year is when you would start if you were to be elected. And your point of contact.
Sure. My point of contact is Treffinger4Nevada.com. That's Treffinger, the number 4, Nevada.com. I'd appreciate your vote. I will say this, we Republicans have ignored down ballot races for a long time, and now you see that some people go from the DA's office to vice president in the White House. You need to pay attention to down ballot races. Conservative voices in local government matter, and I will be that voice for you, and I will make consistent changes to protect our community and make everybody safer.
You point of contact, did you do that?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Well, Timothy Treffinger, thank you so much for being on the program. We really appreciate you coming out. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me.
Folks, that's Timothy Treffinger. He is a candidate for Clark County District Attorney, and he says he's going to be the conservative voice in the DA's office. This is Steve Sanson and Stephanie Phillips with Veterans in Politics. Until next time.